Our next session today with Gluware Intent 19, we're going to speak with the folks at Merck. Merck is a Gluware adopter, and Mike Howe is going to chat with Sal. How do I pronounce your last name?
Rannazzisi.
Rannazzisi.
Sal's fine.
Sal is good. Okay. They're going to chat about what Merck's challenges were, and then why they adopted Gluware and how that's worked out. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike and Sal.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you joining here this evening, this afternoon here. Yeah, it's already evening in my mind, right? It's been a long day. And thanks to everyone joining online. So the title of this presentation is Using Gluware to Automate the Merck Network to Enable Agility and Security. So really, we're trying to look at some of the outcomes, but definitely in this session, we know it's a technical audience diving into some of the meat to get down to it. So a very quick background on myself. I was an engineer for the first part of my career in operations and design and architecture, so I know the pain firsthand in terms of doing manual configurations. And then I've been with the Gluware team for 3 years now. I'm very excited to bring in the intent-based intelligent automation to the network team. And so joining me from Merck is Sal Rannazzisi. So Sal.
Hey everybody, how you doing? My name's Sal. I'm from Merck. I'm an associate director. I've been in pharma about 18 years now. I work for a small Dutch company. We got named Organon, got bought by Schering, got bought by Merck. And I've been at this thing for several decades now with trying this automation stuff and doing networking literally by hand.
Well, we certainly appreciate Sal being here. He made the long commute in from New Jersey, right?
It was pretty painful. It was a long train ride, but it's okay.
So Sal, you know, Merck is not a tech company. Merck is a pharmaceutical company, but the underlying network is pretty important. Could you describe the network and your team, and as you're in the network engineering team, what role you guys play in terms of deploying new technology? So kind of set the landscape of the network and how technology gets rolled out in the Merck network.
Yeah, oh, thanks, Mike, for that. So we have 3 primarily IT hubs, one in New Jersey, one in Prague, and one in Singapore. And we're responsible for all the towers of different technologies, load balancers, firewalls, all that stuff. It's a, not a small network, 360 sites. Most of them are small sales offices. We do have some very, very important manufacturing sites where we have a lot of product that's out there on the shop floor. And getting changes at these sites, sometimes it's like once, half hour in every 5 years. So this is part of the challenges we have. And we have no formal change window. And I'll talk about that more later on. But that's a very important point, that no official change window, right? And something important about this slide is we're still backhauling traffic. So this is, we're doing an RFP right now to fix the WAN and the MAN. But right now, and that's when we talk about all this Microsoft stuff, everybody is being backhauled through US data centers to go to the cloud, right? And that's what, I'll talk about this more as we go on. And of course, I love that Mike put on there, no RGEs. So I always said before a major change, like we don't want any resume generating events on this one. So yeah. So let's not. So I'm very happy you put that on there, Mike, because I say that before every change.
No one complains when the network's working. You know, you don't get very many compliments, right, when the network is working well. But when there's a network outage, it's like that's when the risk is. So your network, the routing and switch infrastructure is primarily Cisco. Is it all new equipment? Maybe you could talk about.
I'm glad you said we're not a tech company, and that is very, very true. We have a lot of old stuff out there, and as long as that shop floor is working, it's up. They don't want you to touch it, right? We have a lot of old stuff, and before 2003, we were a Nortel shop, and we still have some of them out there, which we're not automating because we don't want to spend the time doing it. But yeah, we have a lot of old stuff, 25,000 switches out there, and nodes. But there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's been challenging, to say the least.
Right, so they are the perfect brownfield, right? Everyone talks about the next and the new deployments, but the reality we're all kind of living in is, is the network is largely what you inherit, right? So can you talk us through, when I had a chance to sit down like with your kind of boss's boss, and he had like 7 major things he looked at, and I think part of the reason that helped get Glue kind of expanded in Merck was that we could help accelerate 6 of those 7 projects, right? And so again, the network being the underlying enabler for a lot of the technology things you're looking at doing. What are some of those top goals and things that run through, kind of from top down?
Well, we had this little issue a few years ago, and that really have made people start thinking about things differently.
Yeah.
I mean, I started with you guys about 3 years ago when we were doing DMVPN. It was Gluware 1.0, and we still have many sites on DMVPN now. But all these things started to bubble up to the surface about code promotions and P-certs and also the type of stuff. And again, it wasn't top of mind before, and unfortunately it takes a pretty drastic event to happen to get it to be top of mind for people. And of course, we'll talk about this a little bit too, but we have managed services running our network, right? And that's what some of the money and how long it would take. And we really need to tighten up the configurations. And one of our problems that I talk about a lot is we have paper-based standards, right? So we'll go through all this work to put a paper-based standard out there, and by the time it goes through all the signatures and all this other type of stuff, it's already old, right? And the rest of the network just can't keep up with these paper-based standards, right? And I talked about the maintenance windows, the security patches. It's good and bad, but like one just came up was the VStack, right? So that all of a sudden we have to take off VStack of all these routers or all these switchers, and now we're able to do this in a very short amount of time, as before it would take a long time to do it, right?
So, you mentioned you started using Gluware a while back when you were automating Cisco IWAN, DMVPN,
Sure, yep.
And that got to pilot phase, and then the project kind of went on hold due to the vulnerability that kind of hit the network and affected things. And so the NotPetya ransomware kind of affected Merck in pretty dramatic ways. Unfortunately, quite a few big companies got hit by this, took down email servers, took down storage. And so Merck made the decision, let's leverage the cloud, right? Let's in a big way to change things, modernize. Let's move email service to the cloud with Exchange. Right. Let's move storage to the cloud with OneDrive. Let's enhance security with Windows 10. And so they came to the network team and said, top priority is enable us to use Microsoft Azure Cloud, right? Sure. So that happens, and how do you consume that? Because you shared with us before, you tried another SaaS app, which software as a service application, which caused a degraded performance on the network. So when it comes down from high, right, to say, okay, enable our network for cloud in SaaS services for Microsoft in this case.
Yeah, no, this is a great slide. We talked to it before. So they decided to turn on simplicity, right? And it takes your local hard drive and would copy to the cloud. They didn't tell us they were doing this, right? So, and people forget about the fact that people have 10, 20, 50 gigs stored locally on their box, right? We won't talk about that problem, right? But when they turned it on, it completely buried the network. So we have a managed service provider. We went to the managed service provider. We said, okay, we need to enable quality service on these 400 routers, 500 routers that we have, right? And it took a lot of time for them, first of all, to ramp up, and then take our configuration in flat text file and copy and paste it home. And we paid a lot of money to do this. And lo and behold, come to find out, as we've gone through this with Glue, right, that 1 in 6 routers had no quality service on them at all. And the reason for this is because we have 3,700 routers, 2,800 routers, 3,800 routers, 2Ks, 3Ks, 4Ks, and if you take a flat text file and you try to copy it over to that, it doesn't work, right? So the problem is, but we paid all this money for it. So when this whole OneDrive thing happened, right, that we knew we had to make quality service changes at scale, quite a few of them, right? And a part of this is that as they rolled out Windows 10 and OneDrive, they started putting distribution points all over the world, and they started copying large amounts of data over the distribution points, and we were able to make quite a few quality service changes. So, and all these things, like a lot of, like Greg and everybody was saying, that we started out very small with just some cost policies, and then okay, well, let's do Snmp, let's do NetFlow, and let's do all these things. So we were able to get a baseline of networking done. So we knew that they were monitoring these boxes, because there's still a lot of boxes that they weren't being monitored until now. But for the first time in years, I can honestly say that everything has the same policies on it, right? Yeah. And it was really so we ended up doing it 6 times. And all these numbers that we'll talk about a little bit later, we pay a finite amount of money per change for managed service providers. Like, the guys who write these contracts are very smart, right? You make over 7 changes, then it's a project. Now you're paying per change, and it's very interesting how much money that really is. But that's what we didn't want. Oh, I'm sorry, am I jumping the shark there?
You're jumping the shark a little bit. That's
Okay,
okay, because we're getting to it.
Okay,
But the kind of the point was, you guys try to move to SaaS earlier without the network team being involved. The traffic saturated the backbone because
Right.
you're backhauling it. Anything accessing internet had to go through the backbone and carry it. Now you're deploying Microsoft OneDrive. They finally say, "Hey, network team, what do we need to do?" You say, "We got to be able to automate QoS. We got to redeploy QoS. We need to redeploy Snmp to monitor it, and we need NetFlow and other components so we have visibility of it, right?" So when you look at that brownfield network, again, Merck being the quintessential install base of a lot of older generation equipment, and you look at your requirements for automation, you guys have been down the path, over the years trying to say, how can we automate? And you were sharing, when you outsource, the outsourcer is probably still doing things manually, right? Evidence shows
Of course they are. Yeah,
right?
sure
But
they
even
are.
internally, when you make changes, as you look to automate, what are the kind of, if you want to look at some of the requirements that the Merck network would need to actually automate?
Well, to really finally standardize it, right? It was a huge problem getting everything where it needed to be. So we would come to us, the OneDrive team, the Office team, and they would say, okay, we're going to put distribution points here in Singapore, Thailand, all over the place. And then if we did not able to make the changes and put stuff in scavenger class and this type of thing, they would have just buried the whole thing again, right? And that's really what we did. And look, I've been, well, that's the next slide, but so all these things that we're talking about, like our network is very brownfield. And some of the things which were very interesting about Gluware is the fact that we have many, many different versions of code on the routers, right? That's changing now that we're doing automation for code promotions with Gluware, but you might be running some 3700 series box with, whatever, 3.x code or really old code. And even though, you guys are very adamant that, look, we don't officially support this, but it worked, right? Like 2K routers, 3K routers, like old stuff. And it wrote the configuration because it's all abstracted. It didn't matter if anybody knows QoS, it's a rather painful experience usually, right? Because we're all different, the queuing algorithms are different and all that type of stuff. But Gluware was able to do it, right?
Yep.
And
So,
Okay.
looking at just the evaluation of automation, you guys are a big company, you have everyone knocking in on your door.
Sure, of course.
You've had, scripting, you've had other products, you've had vendor
Oh,
products.
sure.
Take us through, again, knowing what you're trying to accomplish, even specifically with this OneDrive and Windows 10 move, you had a chance to kind of then look back at the landscape of automation, and what did you find?
Well, we've been at this a long time. We started playing around with Ansible probably 5 or 6 years ago, and some of these inventors of Ansible were actually at Merck. We started doing some playbooks, this type of thing, 1PK, DFA, every acronym in the book that Cisco had done, and it was very hard to, Chef, Puppet. We have some very bright guys on us, that are doing some cool DevOps stuff, but you could never, put it into a consumable format to drive real change. It was always like a point solution, and then you end up hitting a wall because there's only so much you can do. But, and again, like for where you guys were when I started 3 years ago and where you are now with Gluware 3.0, it's like completely different software. It's very, very different than it used to be, right? But we've tried this for many, many, many years to get some of these things going, and we never could. Even now, I'm just starting to build NXOS stuff with Gluware, and that was always kind of a big hole that we couldn't really do anything with NSOS. But we've tried for many, many, many years, and it's very hard to, it was kind of like herding cats. Like you could not really do automation at scale in our environment, doing with these other tools.
When I look at the spectrum, and you verified it for me many times in our discussions, is that on one side of the spectrum you have DevOps community kind of pushing their tools on the networking team, saying, here, this is working for us, this can work for you. But almost all of those are coding-based tools. So ultimately, you're only going to get so far until you have to do Python and other forms of coding to get it to even do some level of it. And then when you get it to doing something, it's task-based, right? Because when you start peeling the onion of the network, it's the layers of complexity, like you've mentioned several times. You have different routing and switch versions of hardware, therefore different port maps, different operating systems. When you have these different levels of complexity, you have to abstract those away to get to automation, and in doing that in a script is virtually impossible. You generally build a script for each, that fits one specific form, and then you do another. And when you generally ask people who are scripting what percentage of changes are automated, it's less than 10%. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have vendor tools, right? The vendors make tools, and they can do a certain amount of automation on the product side, and they can do automated changes as well, or automate certain things like maybe inventory. But then you say, well, of the devices in my network, and you pick a tool, what percentage coverage do I have? And again, it's small because you have the variation of the products and the tools, and even maybe multi-vendor. So you end up in this spectrum where, okay, build it myself, vendor tools, and there's the gap in the middle, which obviously where Gluware looked to fill. So one of the things that we're big about, and I think you've been one of our biggest advocates, is that Sal didn't want to become a programmer, right? Did you want to kind of go become a Python expert? Or?
Well, I have a lot of Udemy classes that are
take the classes.
Right,
it's great to learn, right? And
I have quite a few of them right now on my cart, but
you put them in your cart.
finding the time to go through them is another story.
Exactly.
But,
So when Gluware's approach, and again, you mentioned our kind of breakthrough, Jeff talked about it in an intro, but we had a breakthrough with something called config modeling, and it allowed you kind of to drop in your own, like the vendor native CLI. So I think that was
that's a great point. So one of my fellow engineers, Robert Hakla, who's in Singapore now, we were at an EBB in San Jose, and then we drove up and went to visit the guys at Gluware for a couple days, and Jeff, everybody in the whole company sat down with us, and they showed us this config modeling thing. And and the aha moment came on that they exposed all of the nerd knobs that were never exposed before. Like before, I always knew there was really interesting things going into covers, but it wasn't exposed to you. So as we keep going through these slides, and you see this model of automation, and you can kind of understand it now. Like you can look, if you know how Quaz works, right? You can look at your policy maps, all this stuff, and we're going to get to that. Oh, this is a perfect slide, Mike. But this is what it looks like, and many of our automation models that we had are much, much larger than this. But what's interesting about it, you start with these concept items, and just like we were talking about, right? You're doing the show, run, begin, show, section, class maps, right? And then you're looking at a regex that you have defined in the feature concept, and then you're landing commands or taking out commands that aren't in your command list. So this little trick that these guys have done is, and I've called it the secret sauce before, but trust me when I tell you it is the secret sauce. We are doing changes at large scale that I never ever thought in 20 years I'd be doing today. So as we go on, and again, ping me offline. I was going to do live demos in my lab, but I'll show you guys later. But if you understand this concept, and this makes logical sense, you're not looking at some Python script or some YAML playbook. This makes sense, and you can look at the flow of how the automation's happening in all the different pieces. And if you look at some of these command line lists, right, you can simply move it in or out. So we had some problems, like some people left telnet on the SSH port, right? So we tested in the lab. I have a huge lab built. And then when you went to go into production, people had transmit and import SSH and telnet on the SSH ports. So we simply made one small change, and we removed the command and put it back in, right? So being able to do that was amazing.
Yeah, and just to describe what you're looking at a little bit here is that most people know what a template is, right? A template is, okay, this is my cookie cutter for my small branch or my top or X switch. And I was, lazy engineers do a lot of copy paste, right? I was one of them, so you start from a template and you just propagate things forward. The Gluware approach with config modeling is, if you look at the yellow box, it's called an assembly, and it's kind of like an intelligent template or a modular template. So you're kind of telling our engine, what do I care about? What am I going to automate? So Greg said in the beginning, you can start small. Like we had a hospital in the Midwest just automate Snmp v3 to start. So you literally can just automate a single piece of a CLI. And most of us, who've been on a Cisco command line, show run all, and you get a big dump, and it's a big block of text. It's human readable, but it's not highly automatable. Essentially what you see here is a deconstruction of everything you configure, block feature by feature becomes a policy. And when you actually zoom in on, well, how do I define an Snmp policy? We actually expose it as native CLI. So this isn't a block of CLI we're going to just open up a connection and push it. That was automation maybe 20 years ago. This is the desired state. So how do I get from what's on the device to my desired state? And that's through something we call declarative provisioning, which we're going to go into. But Sal was mentioning, we essentially are teaching our engine how to read and how to write. And we're able to read from each device the current state, and then we know we want to put this on it. So our orchestration engine essentially, does the removes of the commands that shouldn't be there, adds what should be there, and fixes it. So the end state for each feature kind of under automation or management ends up in the desired state. And so this was kind of really critical to Merck because you guys are faced with these devices out there that are, like you mentioned, out of policy. And there's commands. And if I'm a network engineer, what I don't like to do is remove commands because I don't know, well, what's that going to break? Is it tied to something? No one ever removes commands. We always add commands. And that's why, we have this.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So, and that's something, we have a lot of third parties doing our configurations, and no offense to them, but people just copy and paste commands over and over and over again. So let's say we put in a 2600 router in late 90s, whatever. Those commands are still on our network on an ISR 4K because people just copy them over and over and over again. They don't look at these standards that we have because it's much easier to take that file that you configured the last 20 routers with and start copying it over and over again. And that was, so not only did we land thousands of commands, but we took out thousands of commands. And that was really the trick to me, that we were not only, we literally had like N-bar statements for Kazaa on the network, seriously, that were there for, so one was Kazaa, I don't even know when it was. I don't even remember now. I remember when it hit, but, and that's the whole thing. And it goes so much deeper than this because you can specify, like, for example, on an interface, you can specify what command you're going to allow on the interface or what you're going to take out. Right? So it's very, very interesting if you start looking under the covers, but let's keep rolling.
Yeah, so just to kind of define what we mean by declarative, every time we make a change to the device, our engine is reading current state, and we'll roll through every single feature that we're managing, read current state, pull it in. Again, behind the scenes, we'll wrap everything in a data model so then it can become comparable and we can code it or interface with it. We read current state, we analyze the feature set you're looking to push. We understand with complex network features like QoS, there's class maps and port maps and interface commands and global commands. There's a whole hierarchy of commands that have to be dealt with. An orchestration engine can handle that in that complexity. And so once it compares the existing state, it dynamically creates the required CLI. And one of the favorite features Sal has is that we kind of provided a print preview or, before, like I just printed up the flyers today and the guy said, I said, please print 1 before you print 50 because I want to make sure it comes out right. Sure enough, the one he printed, the colors were all messed up. We had to change printers. But you don't want to hit commit on a network and not know where you're going to end up. So we have a feature called preview that actually shows you based on per device what is the end state going to be. So it's dynamically creating the CLI on the fly. So it's actually quite a powerful.
That's a great point. And that to me was really, I call it the get out of jail free card, right? You have, so as we kept going forward, we kept it's like a Lego building blocks. That's what I call it. So we started with one piece. We bolted on another piece. We bolted on another piece. And every part of the way, we run this config preview. And then it will tell you what's going to be put on the device and what's going to be taken out of it. Right? But then, as you build this in my lab, of course, you find these other little quirky things like Telnet on the SSH port, on the VTY lines, right? And then we went and fixed that in a matter of minutes, seriously. But that's very interesting. And each little session, we can look at mine later offline, but our model of automation is much, much larger. And sometimes it was just one command, system-MTU, for example, right? To put on a switch. We made one thread just for system-MTU, right? But you're absolutely right. And, so once you start using this thing, this is really 90% upfront work. I'm not going to lie to you. It was a lot of work building these things.
Just to, Sal adopted, when we first brought config modeling to the, Gluware helped onboard it. And the tools that we actually use to read the network and model are now become available. 3.4, we introduced the ability for customers to self-onboard features. But you can't skip the testing cycle. You still have to understand in a lab what's going to happen. You have to look at it and test. I mean, we don't advocate it all, right? Just automation can be dangerous, right? So
No RGEs.
Yeah, no RGEs. You want to test, you want to verify, and then you want to roll to production. And we can even talk to when you did finally hit the roll to production. You didn't just hit apply on all your networks. So we can talk about the build. But
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, we met you guys in January, and we really worked very hard, and with Alex and a lot of the engineering team at Glue, and we went live in March. And we first started with 5 routers, and it was 10 routers. Then it was like 25, and then we kept pushing the envelope till finally we're like, all of them. We would just push the change out to all 440 of them. And no worries whatsoever. I mean, and we were really focused on common services, right? Let's get the baseline configuration on. We have since built a very, very large orchestration policy for DMVPN, and we're doing some geosegmentation, and we're taking DMVPN sites and making them all go through a firewall. Huge, huge attempt. But all these things are really true. The OS upgrades are working great as well.
Just to talk to this slide a little bit, because I know you're so moving on so fast.
Okay, sorry.
The excitement is uncontainable.
Yeah.
But when Merck came to us, and the primary requirement was around configuration management. However, anytime you want to hit configs, you got to do, well, like I think Ethan mentioned earlier, what is the state of my network? What is my current inventory? And what are my current operating systems at? And do I have to get to a certain level? So there's a bunch of usually precursor steps till you get to, let's say, policy management or even the full router configuration. And so what you're seeing here begins to lay out the whole kind of spectrum of the Gluware application suite, which introduces the ability to do dynamic inventory as well as assess with certain vendors. We can pull checks to see if you have any vulnerabilities on the operating systems you're running. With drift and audit, Sal was talking to you a little bit that the audit engine can go and check for specific configurations on the network. So when you're kind of spot checking and you go, someone left Telnet enabled on my VTY lines and they should all be SSH. You can you ask yourself, well, is that happening on any other devices? With audit, you can make a very quick, easy policy to say, I want to scan my network and show me any of them that are violating this, internal, let's say, Merck policy to not let Telnet be enabled on a VTY port. Say audit, it'll show you exactly which devices are violating that policy. And then, assuming you're doing config modeling, you can just define a policy to rewrite that configuration and hit provision, and you now have just cleaned up that, let's say that exposure on all the routers or devices that it's touching. So the config audit and drift is about monitoring for change. I think drift had an interesting application at Merck because, again, they've paid outsourcers for changes. They say, here, Mr. Outsourcer, here's the changes you're supposed to do. 6 or 8 months later, they make those changes, right, because it takes a while. And then you find that the quality isn't always there. How do you have the oversight to say, does my paper standard meet what's on the network? So you can actually audit the work and potentially use it as leverage if they're not doing their job. And so all these applications, and Sal mentioned operating system upgrade.
Right, but the difference is not only can you audit the work, you can remediate it at the same time, right? So that was the thing. We had HPNA, now it's Insight Manager, whatever it is. You could run these scripts on the Insight Manager, but you could not remediate that problem. And one other quick point I want to make about this, like we talk about these building blocks. All layer 2 modeling is done, right? And we have 1 stack, 2 stack, 4 stack, whatever it is, all these different iterations of switch stacks. And then, iOS XT switches, 3850s, 9300s, all this stuff. I have one model for all those, right? Whether it's a 24-port switch, 48-port switch, it's all completely abstracted, and it doesn't matter what platform it is, what version of code it is. We're orchestrating things at large scale now in our layer 2 switch environment without, calling out what type of device it is because it's not necessary anymore. Right.
So as we move on to the content of the demos, you're going to get to see demonstrations of all of our pieces of software here. Just a kind of a summary in terms of what Merck was able to accomplish with that move to Azure and automating QoS. Sal, I mean, you could kind of take us through it in terms of we talked about if you were to have outsourced it, it was going to be 6 to 9 months, and you accomplished it in
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, especially when I started going through this, but I have the actual statements of work from service providers, what they charge for this stuff. And these numbers are real, right? And once we ran through the changes one time, we made changes on all these routers 6 times globally, right? And, but because we know how much it costs, like an Snmp chain, it changes a certain amount of money. Syslogs a certain amount of money. Every little piece of the puzzle that we now have in this complete orchestration model, right? Now we just finally got the enterprise monitoring team to commit that we don't really need separate Snmp models for all different parts of the world. So we're going to go back and make it, take pieces of it out because we don't need it, right? But these numbers are real, and I could, I'll gladly talk to you in more depth offline. But they're real. I mean, this is real. How much money, and we use this to build the business case. And not only that, and Don from Gluware always talks about the time to value.
Yeah.
Like, what does that time work to be agile? Because before this, if we could not have done 6 global changes on 450 routers if we didn't have Glue. There's just no way. You just can't do it, But
So often people say, well, what is the true ROI? And, a lot of it comes from cost avoidance. Like we said,
Right.
if you would have made all of these changes and you paid the outsourcer all that money, so that's cost avoidance. What about, you as an engineer who now is able to automate, how does it affect just your life, the staff, in terms of just the return?
yeah,
to the
it
organization?
certainly has added a lot of
You
time.
told me it saved your marriage. I don't want to quote you off.
Well, put it this way. I'll give you an example. I took my email off my phone, and I took Jabber off my phone, and I've really cut my work week back to 50 hours a week this year. But I feel we're at the tip of the iceberg where we're going with Glue right now, with the newer version that we have, and what we're doing. So it's certainly helping, and it's helping the ops team, and really, the third party. I just had some meetings with them this week about doing large-scale changes and importing all the devices into Glue. The biggest problem we have right now are not with the Gluware technology, it's with logistics, right? We have 22,000 switches, right? And the naming convention is really not very good because I don't know if that's a manufacturing switch. And we have these huge security networks because everybody's watching the shop floor and research sites. I don't know if that's a research switch. So the issue is right now is that I can't delineate which model of automation to apply to that switch. I don't want to put port security on a manufacturing switch. I don't want to put broadcast storm control. So the issues now are logistical issues for us internally and still kind of self-inflicted pain rather than the technology itself, right? So that's kind of where we're at now. We're doing bulk imports into Glue.
So it's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Just we'll just highlight 2 other very quick use cases Merck has done because they initially went with a license for 500 devices and automated their routing backbone. After they got that win under the belt and it was kind of proven and they made a business case internally, they helped through sales leadership help bring it up and say this can be used across switches and firewalls and load balancers. This is something we should really be adopting. And so one of the next policies they did was, the next projects they kicked off was automating network admission control, which is, so no one can just plug into a switch and gain access to your network. And this, again, tied up to upper management objectives of security. And so you were able to, now NAC in and of itself is not overly complicated. However, you have to do certain steps, and if you do it manually, you got to make sure it's an access port, not a trunk port. Sure. There are things at the global. Again, it's hierarchical, right. So it's not a cut and paste type of. It would be very, very difficult using another product to just deploy it because it's not a trivial configuration.
No, you're absolutely right. And what we found out is that when you we had port security in a port, they roll out NAC. It was causing a lot of problems. So we went ahead and removed all the port security off the port to fix NAC, and then they had to add another command, authentication, MAC move, permit, or something like that. And we were able to just go into one section of the engine and add or remove this command and click a button and completely redo it. So this was a huge one. And now we're putting NAC on like any new build that we do. Like I just did a research site in South San Francisco. We put NAC on the policy even before they add it to ICE, right? So this was a huge one for us,
And
the
I
NAC.
think this is another thing that we often think about is that, when you look at QoS or when you look at security, it's not a one change and done, right? It never is. It's like it's continual change and sometimes way more frequent than you want. So what is going to enable you to make those life cycle changes and keep going? And this is where, again, if you outsource it and it's 6 to 9 months, or if you go off to build and develop a script or a playbook to try to do it, you're kind of losing all that time, and then you're already into the next change and the next change, right? So
Well, the problem with NAC is people have certain things plugged in that they shouldn't really have in, of course, as you all know. So that's the biggest problem with NAC, that you find some things on the network that really shouldn't be there, and then the phone calls start,
Yeah.
you broke
Yeah.
my rogue server.
So just a quick touch on why Gluware is unique in this NAC case is that the Gluware engine can actually look at what is an access port or what is a trunk port, and actually, so it's called conditional rendering. Only apply the configuration if it meets this. And then there's another case with NAC where there's older commands for the older release of code, and there's a newer set of commands for newer release of code, and it can actually determine which operating system you're running and apply the right code. So this is again back to layering and intelligence with the system. And the very third use case we're going to highlight before we get to a short break and then some demos. You've said it before, and I don't know if everyone else is getting this, but I got forwarded around to my email and on LinkedIn. It's like another vendor vulnerability. There's one that exposes. It's always something else, right? But essentially, the vendors have to disclose these. Some of them issue what's called a PCERT, security advisory, and you're kind of inundated with these things. So you have to assess your risk and then figure out, is it affecting my network and the devices I have? And so what Gluware you're going to see in the demo is our ability to automate the check of the PCERTs on the devices you have, and then take the next step, which again is to take action and do OS upgrades. And so, and not only upgrades, downgrades. Merck was not only unique, but it's a common problem. I've talked to other customers. Boxes come from the vendor with like the latest code. Well, you guys haven't tested that. You haven't validated it. So you're not only doing upgrades, you're doing downgrades, right? You're actually having to bring it down to the version you trust, right? Sometimes that latest, greatest code is introducing more bugs than you want to deal with. So, Sal, maybe a couple quick words on how you guys have begun to use OS Upgrade, because you sent a note out. It was like over a weekend you did like 200 switches or something.
Yeah, no, this was a huge one for us because that was the biggest problem. Somebody takes it out of a box, brand new, you're building brand new stuff, and it's higher than we want to be, right? And we always, and nobody ever downgrade it. Because let's face reality, it's a lot of work downgrading it, right? It's a lot of work upgrading it until now. But if you've ever done an iOS XE one where you have to clean software and all this other type of stuff, it's very, very useful, right? So the other thing is that you can transfer the code over and it'll copy it to the switch and then transfer and then reboot the switch, which is huge. So I'm thinking by the end of the year with the scheduling tool, which we asked for a feature request for that last year, you have this scheduler, right? So you can just grab all your devices and say, transfer the code over on this day, right? And then transfer the day, because it's very, very hard, especially on plant sites and even regular sites, right? Nobody wants the network to go down, But so that was really huge that we were able to do the code promotions. Matter of fact, on Friday, I'm having a huge meeting with people, and we're going to put in a lot of switches this week alone to start on this code promotion project because there's a memory leak on 375, if you don't know.
So, right?
On iOS XE, which is a pain in the neck.
There's a couple screenshots here. I won't kind of run through it all, but taking a real-time inventory, using the integrated calls, in this case the Cisco support APIs to make to determine what PCERTs are issued, assess the PCERT to say, do I need to take action, and then again move on to actually the OS upgrade. And so with OS upgrade, we facilitate again, like Sal said, the transfer only, the transfer, reboot, and update. We have many integrated pre-checks to check and validate the code levels. And again, making it user-friendly instead of kind of starting with Python script and trying to just jump right into a few clicks, some configuration, and get moving. So I think you covered a lot of the decision and drivers, but any final thoughts to folks who are kind of going down that automation path and what things to consider?
Yeah, let's not, I mean, let me just make sure I'm perfectly clear. This was a lot of work. The Gluware team and us, we spent a lot of time together building this thing. But now that it's done, you have this this little Snmp piece, you have this syslog piece, and you can reuse these pieces over and over again. So it's really like 90% upfront work, and now that it's done, it's there. And a couple other things. There's one policy for all layer 2. We're using regex to see what code it is. Something else that you mentioned over the next slide, right? We have a pre-Denali and post-Denali commands, right? Because after 16.3.6, right, it's completely different commands for NAC, right? So I really think that we're on the tip of the iceberg, and if you're struggling getting things done, look, we're a pharma company. We are not a cloud company. We're not an IT company. We have a lot of old stuff. It's going to remain that way for quite some time. Let's face the reality situation, right? We're not, I mean, we are upgrading. I mean, every year we throw a lot of money at it. We're getting rid of all of our old routers right now, the 2Ks, the 3Ks, but I really think with a lot of these new things with the APIs we're going to see later, some of the, config drift and config, the audit stuff, I really think that we're at the tip of the iceberg now, and by all means, I have a very unique name. You can find me on LinkedIn. Send me a note if you're in New Jersey. I'll let you automate the network yourself. You can click the button if you like, actually. I was going to make a video with my 11-year-old kid doing the automation. I'm like, that might piss off a couple people at Merck, but seriously, it's that easy. Look. It was a lot of work getting here, and these guys put a lot of time in with us. I mean, you guys have a lot of skin in this game. It wasn't like, oh, here's a statement of work. Oh, it's not listed on that statement of work. We're not going to do it. It was like, what can we do to help you? It was a whole different thing. But, I mean, seriously, it's pyramid building now, and we're just going up. And seriously, we're doing things that I never thought I'd be able to do after 20 years of this stuff.
So do we have time for a little Q&A, guys, or let's okay? So we're gonna skip that for now, but certainly, guys, we want to welcome you into the conversation very shortly here. So we are at the point where we're going to take a short break, and then the next segment is actual product demonstrations.